This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 419, part 2, entitled Masculists Expect Feminists to be Biconscious. Continuing straight on. We masculists use monoconscious fluffy feminists like yourselves as anti-models to young women, warning them that if they end up like you, they will pay a very heavy price. They will not get a man, since as masculists and MGTOW ideas spread across the planet, young men will utterly refuse to have relationships with hated, fluffy, manslaving parasites who will be forced to rot on the shelf, spat at for being major gender criminals who deserve to have their fluffy parasite genes removed from the gene pool. Since most young women want to have babies at some stage in their lives, they know that being a committed female careerist and taking care of very young children at the same time, alone, is virtually impossible. So they want to have a man help them raise kids by paying for her to stay at home while the kids are very small. So these young women know they have to be nice to a man or he will not accept her and be unwilling to be a manslave to her. Your monoconscious feminazi bitchery is rejected by most young women, especially when the masculists tell these young women that the major reason why young men refuse to give young women their sperm is because these young men reject marriage and paternity due to the divorce courts having been taken over by the masculist, hated, fluffy feminists who financially crucify one father in 4, making divorce and hence marriage and paternity toxic for men. So young men wipe their hands of marriage and decide not to give women their sperm. Young women are now really panicking as they experience personally with boyfriend after boyfriend that the above is true. Young men now frequently refuse to give women their sperm. They refuse to marry, in brackets, 2/3 of them in many countries now, close brackets, and choose to live the MGTOW lifestyle. They may have relationships with women, in brackets, usually of the latting type, that is, living apart together, close brackets. But they don't live together full-time in the same residence, and they certainly don't marry them or make them pregnant. Masculists teach these young women to hate the fluffy feminist hypocrites as much as the masculists do, and motivate these young women to vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws, especially in the divorce courts and the legislation of the para, etc., so that men are prepared to be fathers again. Otherwise, if the gender status quo in the divorce courts continues, then millions of women will be forced into babylessness, which will make millions of women very unhappy. Close quotes. Masculists realise that it will take a few years for the masculist message to get out into the public arena, to be taken up by the journalists, especially by the writers of articles in women's magazines, who will report on why so many young men refuse to give women their sperm. To explain to young women why this is happening, these journalists will, in effect, be spreading masculist and MGTOW ideas to women, to the general public, so that the general public is made more bi-conscious. After a few years, however, those feminists who remain monoconscious will be treated with growing contempt and intolerance by the masculists, since these masculists expect these feminists to have become biconscious by this time. Those feminists who remain monoconscious will be seen increasingly by masculists and by female masculists as slow-witted, conservative, unprogressive, dull, closed-minded, and hence will be looked on with growing contempt. Masculists will sneer at such monoconscious feminists as MFBs, saying to such women, quote, "You monoconscious feminists are so dumb that you don't even recognise that it's in your own self-interest to become biconscious, since biconscious feminists are much more likely to have boyfriends than monoconscious feminists, that is, MFBs. This is because a monoconscious feminist, by definition, has had only her feminist consciousness raised, so is aware how men oppress women, so is angry at men for that. But since she is not biconscious, that is, she has not had her masculist consciousness raised, she knows nothing about how women oppress men, and that women oppress men far worse than vice versa. So she is much more likely to be a misandrous, man-dumping, feminazi bitch, lashing out at men and feeling morally justified at doing so, since to her gender oppression is a one-way street, that the gender oppressors are men and so should be treated with contempt by monoconscious feminists. To biconscious feminists or masculists, such monoconsciousness is simply ignorant, limited, narrow-minded. As the years pass, a higher proportion of the smarter, more broad-minded of feminists will convert themselves into being biconscious, taking the view that gender oppression is definitely a two-way street, since they will have been exposed to both feminist and masculist ideas and will see that men oppress women, but also that women oppress men. Biconscious feminists have their feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women more or less cancelled by their masculist anger at how women oppress men. So they are much less feminazi bitchy and hence much less misandrist towards men. So are much more approachable by men, much nicer to men. So are much more likely to have boyfriends and to vote with men for the men fairing of the gender laws, especially in the divorce courts, for the legislation of the para, for the fipping of women, for the establishment of masculist groups in every high school, every campus, for the creation of gender equality committees in the parliaments, which deal equally with feminist and masculist ideas, for the legislation of the para, and to get rid of the many misandrous gender laws. At the time of writing, March 2021, this masculisting of women is still largely in the future, but it doesn't take much imagination to envisage that a few years from now, once masculist and MGTOW ideas are widely spread across the planet, so that several billion people have become aware of them, that those feminists who remain monoconscious will be accused by both sexes of being MFBs, that is, bigots, as closed-minded, as dumber. Masculists in particular will increasingly expect feminists to be biconscious. Otherwise, those feminists who refuse to become biconscious will deserve being harangued by masculists, who will treat such monoconscious feminists as vermin, not to be tolerated, to be spat at. A decade from now, those monoconscious feminists who have not converted themselves in the meantime into biconscious feminists will face an avalanche of rejection coming from both sexes, so that the number of feminists who remain monoconscious will dwindle away to zero. This will be something to thank God for, that is, the masculist God, the great liberator of men. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 410 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.